Okay, we're on part 4 of reading. Uh, yeah, we left off with. It's the next day, by the way. I have a new shirt. Next day. It's bright outside. And I'm spending it reading. Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Uh, oh, yeah, we left off. We left Zach at the shrine. And, then yeah, we're just seeing where it goes from there. Left Zach at the shrine after they got the militias stole their boat, basically. So let's get started. The reporter was a moderate middle-brow daily daily occupying the bottom floors in the 5-floor building in Central Port Harcourt. Across the street from our offices was a private elementary school that came awake at 8 a.m. and remained awake till 4 p.m. Next to it was a nightclub that came awake at 8 p.m. and remained awake till 4 a.m. Farther down the street in a row were a mechanic's garage, a restaurant, a car wash. The reporter had been in existence for more than 7 years now, and in that time the snank's strength had grown from 20 to 200 and the print run from 1,000 to 10,000. It was owned by Godwin Amechi, the chairman, to his employees, a 7-year-old veteran journalist who still came to the office earlier than everyone else and stayed till 10 p.m. after the next day's issue had been put to bed. He controlled every aspect of the paper, from its accounts to its editorials, with a director's hand, albeit a benevolent one. He had seen colleagues who were currently out of favor duck into a doorway at his approach. I had seen sub-editors make a sign of the cross before going into his office for a meeting. At midday every day, except Sundays when he stayed home, he'd carry out what we privately called the ceremonial inspection of the guards, starting from a long rectangular newsroom where he'd chastise a poor reporter or praise a deserving one, and end up at the dining room on the ground floor an hour later. For the next hour, he'd sit at the head of the table, surrounded by editors and other senior staff, each doing his best to outshine the other and suggesting ingenious story ideas. The day's favorite reporter usually sat next to the chairman's right, and those grim lunches, an honor that was as painful as torture, said those who had experienced it. Today I was experiencing it. For over an hour, I answered the chairman's questions, giving as much detail as I could, hardly blinking, hardly breathing, mostly swallowing without chewing, and gulping down mouthfuls of water to stop myself from choking on the pounded yam. Now I understood why some colleagues called these lunches the Last Supper. You've done a great job. Good pictures. Thank you, sir. Have some banana. Thanks. And tell me about Zach. I understand you were there with him. He grabbed the morning paper, which carried my article. Yes, he was very helpful. He's still out there on Enrique Island. He said he needed a break. I knew him once. You took for the same paper, but that was a long time ago. The kidnapping, which had receded into the inside pages of the previous couple of days, had vaulted back to the front page once again, mainly because of the violent gun battle on the island. Some of the men, like Nakam at the Gulf, speculated in their reports that Mrs. Flood might be dead, using garish pictures of dead bodies and burnt huts to report this. My story, which my paper brought out in a special edition, had captured more attention than the other reports, perhaps because I referenced and quoted Zach in a lot of my piece, also because, due to my training, I knew how to use pictures more effectively than the other reporters. My close-ups conveyed the shrill urgency and tragedy, which my text tactfully refrained from mentioning, with twice the impact. This morning, 2 Reuters reporters, after reading my story, had come to the newsroom to chat with me. After the meal, which I could still feel spinning in a hard lump between my chest and my stomach, I sat in the deserted newsroom to recover from my ordeal. Most of the reporters were out in their beats and would start to trickle in only in the late afternoon when they wrote their pieces for the next day. When I felt the strength return to my legs, I stood up and crossed over to the editor's office. I found him seated behind his desk, the fan in the corner focused directly at his face, a toothpick stuck between his lips, his tie loosened, exposing his lumpy neck. Ah, here comes our star reporter. When are you going to see the husband? Right now, he's expecting me. I just came in to let you know. Go. Make sure you get a good interview. Well, you send around interviews till after everything is over. Once it's over, isn't it? Anyways, Go get whatever you can at him, then take the rest of the day off, and take the day after that. We'll find a nice, exciting assignment for you when you come back. He stood up and shook my hand. His behavior toward me had dramatically changed since I returned from Irikifi. The chairman is really pleased with you. He thinks you'll make a good reporter. We shall see. The Flood's house was one of the many colonial-style buildings in Port Harcourt waterfront, where most of the wealthy expatriate oil workers lived. It was hidden behind a tall barbed wire topped wall, and I passed through two gates and about half a dozen security men talking to each other on radios. I was led in by a uniformed guard. We crossed a huge lawn in the front house, which the guard pushed open without pressing the bell. I followed him into a suspicious living room, dimly lit by shaded wall lights. An ornamental fan turned slowly in the center of the ceiling. He went out through a back door that led to the patio, where Flood was waiting, seated on a wicker chair and cocktail on a glass table in front of him. He waved the guard away, then stood up and shook my hand. Thank you for coming, Mr. Rufus. That's a good name. Is that a common name around here? I know a few. He waved me and said, haven't been here long, you know. This is my second year in the country, and I'm still trying to understand my place and the people. I think Nigerians are very nice and hospitable. You think so? Even after the kidnapping? James Flood looked momentarily surprised at my directness, but I wanted to get to the point as quickly as possible. I wasn't used to talking to people like him, and I was nervous. He sighed and his eyes turned dark as he reached forward and picked up his drink. He must have had a few from my arrival. His movements were slow and deliberate, just like his speech. So far, he refused to talk to the media, including his country's media, apart from the few prepared comments about missing his wife and hoped that the kidnappers would release her soon. I'd be the first reporter he had agreed to speak to. I was aware how important this moment was, even though I was here by default. Tell me, are you married, Mr. Rufus? No, please call me Rufus. It's also my first name. No, Mr. Flood, I'm not married, only 25. Call me James. Well, a lot of you chaps do marry rather early, isn't that so? A few of the workers I know, very young. They always seem to talk about their families, children, and all. Yes, there are a lot who marry early. He sighed again and went quiet, as if he lost interest in the thread of talk. He stood up. Let's go inside. I'll show you something. Drink in hand, he led me the way into the living room. He picked the remote and flicked the TV on, and there, on the BBC channel, they were talking about the kidnapping. Isabel Flood, a British woman, had been kidnapped by rebels in the Niger Delta. An attempt to make contact was foiled by an unplanned military intervention, and it was doubtful if Isabel was still alive. Some oil companies had already stopped sending expatriate workers to the region. They were even thinking of shutting down their operations because of the cost was becoming higher than they could bear, and this possibly was already causing tension in the oil market, with prices expected to rise in response. He turned off the TV. It's like a circus. I can't go out, not even to the office. Reporters stalk me everywhere, and the funny thing is, I don't even know what to tell them. I don't know what's happened to her. That's why I wanted Zach to go in there and find out. And now you say he's not well. What's wrong with him? Is it serious? He needs rest. They're out there. It's good for him. James scratched his stubborn chin again, looking at me strangely, waiting for me to say more. But I returned his look and kept quiet. But we had a deal. You agreed to go out there to be my eyes and ears, Mr. Flood. Call me James. James, there really isn't anything more to report than what we put in the paper. What do you think? Is she alive or not? You said you have some pictures for me. Did Zach give you any message for me? I showed him the picture and the ones he had and published the papers. The burning boat, the houses, the sculptures on Enrique Faye, and finally a picture of myself with Zach on the tree. Zach had suggested the last just for proof. Flood put them back into the envelope and placed them beside his drink on the table. Let's get you a drink. He picked up a bell from the side of his table and rang it loudly. Then, as if unable to keep away from the news, he turned on the TV again. The screen was filled with a blown-up photo of smiling Isabel. Behind her was a crowded street, a bridge, in front of the distance the iconic Big Ben clock tower. Next, there was a shot of a picketing youth holding placards in front of the oil company building in Port Harcourt. The segment was accompanied by a long rote-like voiceover over poverty in Nigeria and how corruption sustained that poverty, and how only a few had access to that wealth. Flood turned off the TV and turned back to me. Such great potential. You people could easily become the Japan of Africa, or USA of Africa, but the corruption is incredible. I said nothing. I looked to the door to see if the maid was coming in to answer to Flood's ring. He warned to this topic, scratching his wig vigorously as he spoke. Our pipelines are vandalized daily, losing us millions and millions for the country as well. The people understand what they do to themselves, but they do understand. What? You ever heard of the town called Junction? No, I don't think so. It's from there. I'm from there. Almost 5 years ago, I came home from Lagos after graduation from journalism school and found half the town burned to the ground. The newspaper said the villagers brought it upon themselves by drilling into pipelines to steal oil. You guys heard of that? Isn't that place called Jesse? That is a different place. There were countless villages going up in smoke daily. It was Place Junction went up in smoke because of an accident associated with the vandalism, as you call it. But I don't blame them for wanting to get some benefit out of the pipelines that have brought nothing but suffering to their lives, leaking into the rivers and wells, killing the fish, poisoning the farmlands, and all they were told by the oil companies and the government was that the pipelines were there for their own good. They had that they hold great potential for their country and their future. These people endure the worst conditions of any oil-producing community on Earth. And the government knows it, but doesn't have the will to stop it. The oil companies know it, but the government doesn't care. They also don't care. Doesn't care. They also don't care. And don't you think the people are corrupt? No, they're just hungry and tired. Well, I've read about it before, a tragedy, but it does illustrate my point. No, actually, it illustrates my point. Haha, you argue rather well. I must give you that. Now, where's that? He picked up the bell and rang it again impatiently. After a while, the door to the patio opened and a maid entered. She was dressed in a blue uniform and reached just below her knees. With a white apron around her waist, she stood next to the TV and stared at Flute, her head inclined, not saying a word. Give my guest here a drink, Coco. What can she get you? A beer would do, sir. And a refill for me. She turned and disappeared into the kitchen. I watched the movement of her full waist beneath the close-fitting uniform. She returned a moment later with the tray bearing my bottle of Star and a glass of whatever Flute was drinking. She set the bottle on the table next to me. She was young and plump, not fat, but very heavy around the hips. She looked more like a student than a maid, and though she was not conventionally pretty, there was a compelling sexuality about her. I was sitting across from the Flood, watching her as she bent forward to place my drink next to him. I saw his left hand almost absently but gently brush against her thigh, and if she hadn't turned and flashed a quick smile, I would have dismissed the gesture as an innocent accident. Thanks, Coco, that would be all. He saw me staring at him, and he shifted his gaze to his drink. I cleared my throat. Mr. Flood, Zach, I said I should ask if everything was okay between you and Mr. Flood. Was there a fight or... He looked long at me, sipping his drink. I stared back at him. I loved the way his face turned meat red, the way he used his glass to cover his mouth, which had slowly tightened. I loved the debate in his eyes. To kick out this nosy African or to tolerate him, he smiled. I should tell you to go to him if it's none of his business. I should tell you to go to him. It's none of his... I should tell you to go tell him it's none of his business. He just wants to know as much possible about the circumstances of the kidnapping. She shouldn't have come to Nigeria. Why? She came hoping to save our marriage. We had drifted apart long ago. We met at university, you know. But then, after we married, I got this job. I was supposed to do all sorts of places, and I guess she must have got tired of the constant change. Some people like me, some don't. We agreed that she should wait in England, and I was just beginning to discover how good I am at my job. I'm a petroleum engineer, and I'm one of the best. Then the transfer to Nigeria came. I left, and she remained in Newcastle, and all the time we were drifting apart. Then 6 months ago, she arrived in here, but by then it was too late. There's another woman, you see. Does Mrs. Flood know about this woman? Yes, this woman. Is she local? Let's just say she lives here in Port Newport. I want to protect her identity as much as I can. She's expecting our child. I see. Do you, young man? The irony is that Isabel thought we could save our marriage by having a child. That was her plan. The first day she arrived, she said, let's make a baby. And what was I to say? I opened my mouth and asked him the question, but I closed it when I saw what looked like a tear leaving the corner of his eye. Too much emotion, or too much whiskey. He wiped his eyes and looked up. So, will Zach be alright? Yes. He will be attended by the nurse at the shrine. I wonder if I can prevail upon him seek a little further, not to hurry back. He's an excellent reporter. I'm sure if anyone can get to the kidnappers, he can. Might he be persuaded, do you think? What? I opened my mouth to ask another question, but I closed it again and saw what looked like a tear leaving the corner of the eye. I wonder if I could prevail upon him to seek a little further, not to hurry back. He's an excellent reporter, and I'm sure that if anyone can get to the kidnappers, he can. Might he be persuaded, do you think? You have to ask him, I guess, and his editor. And as you can see, my mobility is a bit restricted. May I ask you to find out for me? How? Go back to this Cafe Island, talk to Zach, see what he knows. I'm willing to pay him, and you, of course, for your trouble. Go tomorrow. You can return the same day, so you'll lose hardly any time at all from work. I have a boat ready to take you there. I can't. Why? You're a reporter. I should think you'd jump at such an opportunity. I have few personal issues I can take care of. I was thinking of Bulma in my room. I still red from yesterday's tears, waiting for him to return with some sort of solution to our housing problem. He misread my reluctance for bargaining. Look, dear chap, I'll pay you for your time. I know you'll need to prepare my equipment and so on. How about 100,000 naira? All you have to do is go back to the island, give Zach a message, and come back. 100,000 naira. Let's look that up. Bruh, he's gonna pay him $72. Are you for real, bro? Let's see. 2,000. Jesus, you paying him like barely anything. Mm. He was offering a lot of money, more money than I've ever seen. My mind flew in many different directions. Although I thought of the dead bodies covered by bamboo trees, the bamboo leaves, and I knew anything could happen to me on such a trip. I had been lucky once. I had gone and returned safely. I had published my story. I had been praised by the editor and the chairman. Why push my luck? But on the other hand, there was the money. I needed it to pay Bulma's rent and my own rent, for that matter. Of course, I could take the money. I could take the money and not go back to Island. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of that possibility. After all, he couldn't sue me, could he? I'd tell him something came up and that was that. 100,000 was nothing to a man like him. Besides, I don't really think of much of Mr. Flood. If he really cared for his wife, he shouldn't be out there in the he should be out there in the jungle with Zach. Instead, here, drinking cocktails, watching TV, sleeping with the maid. If he was sleeping with the maid, that is, I could take his money and walk out and nothing would happen. Was he here in my country, polluting my environment, making millions in the process? Surely he was entitled to some reparation, some rent money from him. But even as I took the money and an extra 100,000 that he said was for Zach, I still wasn't sure what I'd do when I walked out this gate. Tell Zach he has my permission to negotiate with the kidnappers. My embassy has warned me against paying ransom just yet, but there's no reason why we can't start negotiating. I just want to end this whole thing as quickly as possible. Do you understand? I took 2 plain brown envelopes from him, put them in my jacket pocket, feeling the weight in my chest and shoulders. I'll send you a receipt. He shook his head and took my hands and looked into my eyes earnestly. No need for that, Rufus. I have to trust you. You're my only hope, you and Zach. My wife's life is in your hands. I know things are good between us, but she's a good person, and she doesn't deserve this. I avoided his eyes, and I left him in his cocktail and his split unit air conditioning, his alluring maid, his BBC News, his double gated seafront house, and made my way back to the city. I found Bulma seated on a chair in front of the open door. She was staring ahead at nothing, her head bowed. She looked up and smiled when I touched her on the shoulder. I sat beside her and we watched my tenants come in one by one, back from the work, their eyes tired and vacant, their shoulders bent. They waved or grunted briefly at us. They went into their rooms to take off their shirts and hang them on the nail behind the door, to be picked again tomorrow morning on the way to work. Today we had electricity, so those with TV would fall from the chair before it and stare into the flickering surface as they ate soaked gari or whatever food there was to be had, eating and watching mindlessly till they fell asleep. Those without TV or those who simply couldn't bear the streaming heat in their rooms would come out and sit on the veranda to catch whatever breeze was passing by. Hey Rufus, my countryman. Isaac, my neighbor. He was Ibibio, and for some reason he thought I was from his village, and though I told him I was not, he always laughed and said he recognized my features and that he was sure he He knew some of my cousins, and every day he would greet me with his loud booming call, "My countryman, how life?" And I had taken to uh, answering back with as much cheer as I could muster after a full day. "My countryman, life they turn, man. Family is worth clinging on to wherever one man can find it," which made him feel easier by asking me for a loan when he ran short in the straight and narrow days just before payday. Across the compound, Madam Comfort, her husband, Mr. John, 6 children were all seated in the stools in front of their open door having their evening meal. All along the length of the veranda, other families had similarly turned this narrow space into an extension of the living room, eating and calling across each other or just staring into space. "I have to go back to your Eureka fit now, tomorrow. You said it was very dangerous out there. I'll be fine." "What of you? What are you going to do?" "I don't know." She got up and disappeared into the room and then reappeared with a plate of jollof rice, which she handed to me. "Thanks." More and more I think of moving to the village to stay with Mother. We had discussed this many times before. Mother was still unused to Boma's scarred face. It was as if she expected it to one day disappear, and with it the memory of that tragic day. Whenever they met, Mother always broke down at the sight of her daughter's once pretty face, now a total scabrous mess. The last time she'd run into the room and cried, and eventually Boma had joined her, and two had cried together till their voices went hoarse and they couldn't cry anymore. "Is that what you want? But what is there to do? I'm beginning to get tired of waiting. Sometimes I'm not sure anyone what I want to do." I took some money from the brown envelope and handed it to her. "Here, use this to pay your landlord." "No, I'm not going back there. I'll look for another place." "Of course you can stay here till you find somewhere suitable. I just want you to be sure about what it is you want." I moved my chair out the way as my next door neighbor came out of her room to go to the kitchen. "Hello, Rufus. Nah, your sister be this." "Hey, now, Grace, not my sister." Boma lowered her face instinctively. "The lucky one." That was Boma's name for me, Mr. Lucky. Growing up, I always had a knack for coming out unscathed from the most scary accidents. But in this one case, I wish I had been unlucky. I wish I had been there when it happened, to share in her pain, my family's pain. Instead, it was John who had been by her side, as she was taken to the hospital screaming and shouting that she was blind. She couldn't see. When I came home, proudly clutching my journalism certificate, he pulled me aside and told me they were getting married as soon as she was out of the hospital. They had had 5 very good years of marriage, and I could vouch for that, being their neighbor, but it could have been better if he had quietly broken up with her after she left the hospital. As soon as she was able to look in the mirror without crying, left her to create her own thick skin, her own defenses. I never seen Boma so broken, so defeated. As one day she told me he had gone. Maybe if he had children, a nice little boy to make him feel proud. It's my fault. I kept telling him to wait. I know it is this face. He used to run his hand over my face and said he didn't really care. That as far as he was concerned, I was still the same beautiful girl he'd met when we were kids, and he moved into the house next to ours. Now that it was dark and cooler, the neighbors got up one by one and took their children inside. In one of the rooms, a man and his wife were fighting, their words loud and full of hate. In the background, their children crying. There was a loud sound of a slap. The crying stopped. The shouting stopped. Peace reigned. I thought it was peace resigned for a minute. I was like, what the hell? Where are we at? 12 minutes. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. Ooh, I'm getting better at reading. Low Kirklandly. Zach was lying on the mat under an acacia tree, and though the air was hot and humid, he was covered up to his chin in a brown wool blanket. He attempted a smile when he saw me, but the smile was soon overtaken by grimace. "I'm cold. I'm so cold." His face, gaunt and dejected, turned to me, and the faraway still figures in this. Okay. His face gaunt turned to me, and the faraway figures in the distance. I could see a few worshippers in their long white robes standing in groups before one of the huts. I was shocked by his appearance. "Maybe you ought to think of returning to Port Harcourt. You don't look very good." "I don't know what you came back to do, but I'm glad to see you." His voice was so faint I had to ask him to repeat myself. "See, I bought you a few things." At the waterfront in Port Harcourt, while waiting for the boat, I impulsively stepped into one of the many stores facing the sea and grabbed 2 bottles of Johnny Walker. I guess I was so haunted by the image of Zach begging for a drink that day on the beach, he forced himself up and reached greedily for the bottle, his hands shaking, and suddenly I had misgivings. I'm not sure it's a good idea, but his hands tightened over the bottle, and I was surprised how much strength there was in his grip. He leaned his back against the tree trunk and opened the cap. His hands shook, and spirit spilled as the bottle found to his way to his mouth. He drank it as if he were sucking life and health out of the bottle, but finally he stopped, gasping and coughing, and the sweat gradually turned to his eyes. After that greedy, false exertion, he kicked off the blanket and released a long, blissful sigh. Ah, you just saved my life, Rufus. Has the nurse been to see you? Yes, she was quite nice to me. In the distance, I saw a figure in white coming towards us. It was Naaman, the officious priest who had welcomed us 3 years ago. He knelt before Zack and his man, and his face momentarily clouded when he saw an open whiskey bottle. He said nothing. Welcome back, Mr. Rufus. Thank you. I see you returned. See our colleagues joining. Perhaps take him back with you. No, actually, well, yes, if he's strong enough to go. Nurse Gloria said you were making good progress, Mr. Zack. She said you had a rough last night, when now the fever was broken. You will feel better. She will be back this afternoon and take a look at you. Where's the nurse now? She has business to attend to in Port Harcourt. But while there, she will buy you some medicine for you. Zack moaned and held his head. I think I'm dying. I feel like a ghost already. Do you believe in ghosts, priest? Of course we believe in spirits, good and bad. The bad ones are the ones who have sinned against Mother Earth and can't find rest in her womb. They roam the earth restless, looking for redemption. Okay, I'm not interested in your theology. I put Zack's bad temper down to a fever, his truculence to the whiskey. The priest stood up. Actually, I came to help you back to your room, but I am sure your friend here will help you. I have to go. It is now time for our evening worship. He shook my hand. Good to see you again. Let me know if you need anything. A very busy man, isn't he? Zack stared thoughtfully after the departing priest, belching as he took another sip from the bottle. I wonder what he knows about the kidnapping. And Zack allowed me to lead him back to his hut, still grumbling about the ghost. The shrine, as his selection of the island was called, occupied by the entire waterfront, with the hillock and sculpture garden intertwining between the huts and the water. Notes were arranged as to form two lines in a rough isosceles triangle, with the sculptures occupying most of the middle space and the beach forming the third line. The first hut facing the statue was sort of reception room, which there we had first been hosted. Now we had moved to another hut, a smaller one. Just behind the reception hut, not too far from us, was a worship room. It was bigger than all the other huts, and a single wooden statue stood up like a guard before the entrance. I could see men and women in white robes crowding together near the statue, waiting to go in for the evening service. The other side of the island was the village proper, about a mile away and separated from the shrine by a large buffer area with tall leafy trees. The villagers were all connected to the shrine by religion, and the chief priest had authority over the whole settlement. The villagers were fishermen, mostly making their living on the river that poured its waters into the sea, leading away upstream into the hinterland of marshes and forests and swamps. As I led Zack to the hut, we would be sharing. We passed close to the worship hut, and some of the men and women kneeling before the entrance looked at us briefly as they waited for their turn to go in. I wondered idly what religious ritual went on inside the hut, whether the tall, impressive priest was seated on a chair before the shrine, handing out communion wafers or whatever equivalent to those might be, or whatever. There were mad organic dances and trances, but I doubted the latter. These people didn't look like the dance and trance type. They appeared remarkably composed and solemn. Our hut was spacious inside, as the first one had been. Even though it looked deceptively narrow from the outside, a mat was laid out for me already, and across it was Zack's mat with his slippers in front of it and a worshipper's white robe hanging from the nail above. He saw me looking at the robe and shook his head. Had it changed into something. They were kind enough to wash my things for me. What kind of religion is that? No idea. The only thing I'm interested in right now is the connection is to the militians. My mat had a single sheet spread over it and a pillow where my head should rest. I removed my shoes and sat down. There was nothing else for the hut except for a water pot against the wall and a lamp hanging from a hook over the pot. Zack lay on his mat, his eyes glittering. A sheen of sweat from his forehead, and a whiskey bottle was down half full. So what's the good news from the city? I briefed him on my interview with Flood and handed him his money. He opened his envelope and let the money fall out of his all over his lap. Then he looked and shook his head, laughing drunkenly. This is what I call good journalism. I told him of my visit to his editor and how I got to office as a star very late in the afternoon, confidently that no editor would leave the office until the next day's paper had been put to bed. The office was next to a dump site, and facing it across the road was police barracks. From the office's dim and miserable interior, one can hear a bugle calling to the men to the parade ground, and one can smell the dump site. I found Beaky Johnson eating from a lunchbox on his desk. The box gave up a strong smell of burned palm oil and onions. A red stain shone brightly in the center of his blue tie. The office was narrow and long, like a corridor. On his desk was one at the end, near the window that faced the barracks. On the table were files spilling out papers of an old computer, a stapler, and a stone paperweight, all joying for space. With the lunchbox, he ate with a loud, wet sound, his mouth open. It was an unremarkable place with two unremarkable women working in front of two computers in the other end of the corridor. The editor looked even more undistinguished in his rumpled, oversized suit and tie. He could be on a part in a partition in some gray concrete ministry building. All he wanted to know after I introduced myself was when Zach was trying. When I told him Zach was ill, he looked skeptical. Tell him to hurry up and get well, otherwise I'll stop his salary. I don't think I'll be seeing Zach till he gets back. Better thought about the briefly, his mouth moving mechanically, like a masquerading ruminant, his eyes looking at me unhappily. Well, you must have means of communicating with him, surely. By phone? No phones. No, phones don't work on the island. Well, did he give you his... What is going on? What the fuck? What kind of reporter is that? He still thinks he's a Star Logs reporter, but he's lucky to be working for me. I can send you a few things. I have some pictures and a few paragraphs. We'll make sure you do that as soon as you can. I have deadlines. I'm I'm conscious of my obligations, unlike some people. I felt sorry for Zach. Sorry that he had to work for such a dull, sour employer. And it was at that time I realized how colossal Zach's fall from grace had been. When I stood up to go, he waved me into the seat. Where are you going? Sit down. Let me tell you about your friend. He pushed his lunchbox aside and wiped his hands ineffectively with Kleenex. He leaned forward once more and waved me back to my seat, imperiously, impatiently. Once he was the best. Yes, I know. He used to. No, you don't know anything. Listen, did he tell you there were rookies together at the Daily Times? Oh, he didn't? Then did he tell you that we shared a flat in the Shirlene for 1 year? I was 22 and he was 21. Ah, I could see now. Green, wet behind the ears. Of course, there was nothing like journalism school then. You just finesse your way into things. I bet you went to journalism school, didn't you? They're useless. You learn nothing from there. All you need is to open your eyes, make the right contacts, and be bold. Well, nothing like journalism school for us. You begin as a cub reporter, and if you survive, you become king of the jungle, or at least something high up on the food chain. Beaky drank from a water bottle, belched, and fished around his tongue for a string of meat between his teeth. He wiped the sweat from his bald head. Well, Zach and I were assigned to the news desk. In those days, there was no specialization. No one cared if you wanted to cover the arts or business or news, or the editor simply sent you wherever he wanted. We were assigned to news, but Zach wanted something different. He was full of ideas, restless. At night, he never slept. He wanted to do feature stories about everyday things, ordinary lives. But this was different age, late 70s, early 80s. Things were different then. People bought papers for news only, facts, or at least that's how the editor saw it. But Zach wasn't the kind of person to sit around waiting for things to change. He quit, just like that. Even I was taken by surprise. I remember the exact day in 1982. It was a Monday, usually our busiest day. The newsroom was full. Most of us were back from our beat, and we were rushing to get our copy ready for the sub-editors. The editor was there in the corner, berating one of the reporters, waving a piece of paper around, and then I saw Zach get up from his desk and walk right up to him and call him by his name. Who dared call the editor by his name? It was unheard of. Right in front of the junior reporters and interns, he went right up to him and said, "Tunde, I quit," and I walked out. In those days, you didn't need a resignation letter. Reporters just wandered in and out of the newsrooms. Anyways, he left. He also moved out of the flat while I was at work and with no forwarding address. Just like that, I asked around among our friends and no one knew where he had gone to. I didn't see him again till a year later, and you know where all that was? At Bar Beach. If you knew Bar Beach in the 80s, which you didn't, haha, you certainly did it. Ever heard of Bar Beach show? That was the 70s, a Bar Beach show. Armed robbers tied to sand-filled tin drums and shot by soldiers right in front of cheering crowds. That was a Bar Beach show under the military government. In the 80s, it was beer shacks and prostitutes. We had democracy. The dark days of the late 60s and 70s were over. The country was desperate to put civil war behind them. The victims were just glad the nightmare was over, and the victors, well, what victors? Makeshift barrooms and restaurants were lined up along the beach, and young girls from all over the country went to Lagos looking for opportunity, most of them from respectable backgrounds. But Lagos doesn't care how respectable you were in your village. Hey, this is Lagos. They ended up as prostitutes on Bar Beach. Some ended up pregnant and homeless on the streets, and they were the lucky ones. The unlucky ones died. Their bodies discovered in the water. Days later, washed up in Fairway Lake. He raped, brutalized, strangled, stabbed. Well, Zach saw a story, and that when the rest of us saw only prostitutes selling sex. Every day, he'd be there with those prostitutes, talking to them, and who knows, perhaps sleeping with them, maybe pimping for them. Haha, no, just kidding. Come on, man, lighten up. Some of the girls were really pretty, regular looking girls, only they weren't regular, they were prostitutes. I'd go there when there was news to chase. I'd sit with them in shacks and drink beer. Some of the girls would come over and sit with us. One of them would later be famous for her involvement with him. I could tell the day when I first saw her, I could tell there was something special between them. She was younger than the others, about 18, and thinking about it, he wasn't all that much older than her. We were very young then, young and stupid and full of dreams. In Lagos, you can dream, you see. There were no boundaries, no traditions or family to hold you back. It was that kind of place. Anyways, this girl, Anita, she sat right next to him and didn't leave us when the others drifted off to hustle men. And when she heard I was a journalist, she said to me, Zach is writing a story about us. Did you know that? She didn't speak much, but when she did, she spoke well. She was pretty, perhaps the prettiest thing I've ever seen. And believe me, as journalists, I've seen a lot of pretty things. It's hard to think about. It's hard to think that way about a prostitute, right? And she had manners, good breeding. I could tell she had her hands on the table, and they weren't garnished painting like the other girls. Her nails were cut short, clean. Her makeup was moderate, adequate. She was like a college girl. She seemed lost in a place out of her element. Yes, I said to her. Zach told me. Is Anita your real name? She looked at Zach quickly before I answered. Yes. Why do you want to know? Zach looked at her and said, are you sure you don't want to be going now, Anita? You can't say you're talking to us all night. He laid a hand on her shoulder as he spoke. I'd never seen Zach like that before, so gentle, so soft, so mellow. The fool was in love. I watched Anita wrinkle her pretty nose and shake her head. No, I enjoyed being with you, and she stayed with us till we left. I told Zach, be careful. I think she likes you, but of course I meant he should be careful not to like her too, not to like her too much. He laughed confidently, arrogant as usual. They were just subjects for me, that's all. I'm going to write the most in-depth, interesting feature on the prostitutes in Lagos. But who wants to read about prostitutes in Lagos? I asked. That's when he told me Anita's story. He said Anita had been thrown out of her parents' house when she became pregnant at 16. Her boyfriend couldn't marry her because he was too young, still in school. Zach said that in the traditional system, her boyfriend would have no option but to marry her. But now her Christian parents threw her out because she had brought shame upon them. He said that writing about girls would be showing that he would be showing what was happening to all of us. He would be gradually changing as people, our values, our culture, our way of life, all changing irrevocably. Think about it. That shows you how ahead of his time he was. Well, he wrote his story, and he got his job back, plus a promotion. I read the piece. I'm pretty sure perhaps studied in school journalism. He went to 5 women. He told the story, not 5 prostitutes, 5 women. You get that every week, and he told the story of one of the 5. They were all below 20, and he said people cried as they read the intimate stories of these girls. The politicians were compelled to act. Governors' wives started a scholarship scheme to send these girls back to school. They called it A Better Life for Fallen Women. Speeches were given on TV. International organizations invited Zach to talk about his experience of living with the prostitutes in order to write about them. All over the country, charities working for the police raided brothels to save innocent girls from their terrible life. But hey, not all of them wanted to be saved or rehabilitated. They just wanted to be prostitutes. Haha. Well, our weekend paper became the biggest selling of the country. Zach's byline became the magic formula. People read whatever he wrote, and he did write great stuff, crusading kind of stuff. But always from inside, intimate. But you know what? He told me with all that success, he missed his days at Bar Beach. He missed Anna. She went back to school and actually graduated, and I think it was to forget her that Zach threw himself into pro-democracy movement. When the military dictators returned in the late 80s, he wrote fiery, fearless anti-military pieces that even our editor was hesitant to publish. Zach left us and was immediately wooed by all the prominent papers. In the end, he became editor of Action magazine and Ikija. He did some of his best work then. This is the late 80s. Remember, most of us had to maintain 2 or 3 addresses just to stay a step ahead of the military goons. But you've heard all this before at a school you went to, haven't you? You have. Well, just humor me. Unless you have a wife to go back to, let me conclude my story. There may be a lesson in this for you. And once I listen, don't fall in love with the prostitute, my friend. I really have to. It's getting late. Just listen. I'm almost finished. I listened, even though I knew the rest of the story. A major part of Zach's life, because of the sheer brilliance of it, had been lived in public view. At a certain point, he stopped being the man behind the news and became the news. He reached from the height of his fame during the worst years of the dictatorship, the Abacha years, from 1993 to 1998. After the dictatorship, most people, including myself, expected him to join the new government, but he kept his distance. He went back to his former paper, Action, and continued his in-depth weekend style features, but not the same conviction. By then, he had started drinking heavily. His editorials became increasingly critical of the new government that his pro-democracy pals had worked so hard to bring to power. But then in 2003, he joined the government. He became an advisor to the informant minister, a tough guy with many enemies in the cabinet. It was at this point that Anita miraculously re-entered his life. Only he was not the same awkward young girl he had written about in his famous 5-year article. As a grown woman, poised, she had been to university and had a good job with a bank in Lagos, but of course her veneer of respectability didn't stop the gutter press from tagging them, the prostitute and the radical. There are pictures of them together at fancy parties, book launches, media events. I remember this was in 2004, the year I first met Zach, the year he gave the lecture at my school, the year his heavy drinking began to finally take a toll on him. A wedding date was announced. Later, the paper said he went to London against his better judgment. Anita wanted her trousseau from only the best stores in Oxford Street, and the minister was kind enough to offer to foot the bill as his wedding present. He took the couple along with him. He went to Commonwealth Ministries conference in London. Only then it got past customs. Cocaine was discovered in Zach's toilet bag, among his shaving things. At the trial, he said he had no idea how it got there. The papers got back home, suddenly turned vicious on him. Some implying that he'd been carrying the drugs for the minister. Others, who took the time to investigate Anita's background, discovered that while at university she had a series of liaisons with very rich men, some of them associated with the drug world. At the trial, he said not a single word against her. His only plea was that the minister shouldn't be associated with the story, but of course the minister was sacked, and Zach's Lagos career came to an end. After a year in the UK prison, he was deported back to Nigeria, where he was set free after serving only a month in jail. After his jail term, he disappeared from Lagos. I stood up. Thanks, Mr. Johnson. But now okay. Yoli has to go, but tell Zach to get back here as soon as possible. Tell him not to try me. Tell him not to force my hand, or else from tomorrow, no pay. Tell him that. But what if? Just tell him. I gotta sneeze. You ever get that thing where like you have to look at a bright light to sneeze? That's what I just got. I don't know when I got it, but it's damn. Here, let me just respond to a couple messages real quick. Okay, what am I at? What's my time? Has it not been recording, dude? What the hell? Hold on, let me see.